Use a warm, empathetic tone. James Thompson stepped off the red double-decker bus at the busy London street corner. The cool morning air hit his face as he adjusted the worn duffel bag on his shoulder. After 3 long tours of duty in Afghanistan, the decorated veteran was finally back home in England. But coming home was not as easy as he had hoped it would be. For 6 terrible months, James had walked from office to office, knocking on doors and hoping for a chance. He had sent out more than 200 job applications. He had sat in waiting rooms for countless interviews, always dressed in his best suit, always carrying his military records and university degree. Despite his impressive military honors and his business degree from Cambridge University, the rejection letters kept coming in the mail. The reasons were always the same polite but empty words. "Thank you for your interest, but you are not quite the right fit for our company." They would write, "We have decided to go with someone else who better matches our current needs." But James knew these were just nice ways of saying no. James knew the real truth behind those rejection letters. He could see it clearly in their eyes during every interview. The moment the interviewer realized he was a black man, something would change. Their friendly smiles would become forced. Their enthusiastic questions would turn brief and formal. The warmth in their voices would disappear like morning mist. At first, James tried to tell himself he was imagining things. Maybe he was being too sensitive. Maybe there were other reasons he was not getting hired. But after months of the same pattern, he could no longer deny what was happening. In a country he had proudly served in uniform, he was being judged not by his character or his abilities, but by the color of his skin. The rejection hurt more than any physical wound he had received in combat. In the military, he had been respected as Sergeant Thompson. His fellow soldiers had trusted him with their lives. His commanders had valued his leadership and given him important responsibilities. But here in civilian life, all of that seemed to mean nothing. Some nights, James would sit in his small London flat, looking at his military medals displayed on the wall. He would remember the friends he had lost in battle, good men and women who had died fighting for freedom and equality. Those memories gave him strength to keep trying, even when hope seemed lost. But today felt different from all the other days. Today, James was walking towards St. Mary's Hospital for an interview for an administrative position. He approached the large brick building with its tall windows. He felt a strange mixture of nervousness and hope in his chest. What the hospital staff did not know was an amazing secret. James had recently been appointed as the new chairman of the board of directors for St. Mary's Hospital. The position had been offered to him by the hospital's main investors, who knew about his excellent military record and his business education. They respected his leadership skills and wanted him to help improve the hospital. But James had made a very difficult and unusual decision. Instead of simply taking his place in the boardroom, he chose to work anonymously from the bottom up. He wanted to truly understand how the hospital treated all of its employees before he revealed his real identity. He wanted to see with his own eyes what daily life was like for ordinary workers, especially those who might face discrimination. This decision meant that James would have to endure whatever treatment he received as a regular employee. He would have to bite his tongue and stay quiet, even if people were unfair to him. It would test every bit of patience and self-control he possessed. But he believed it was the only way to get honest answers about the hospital's culture. As James walked through the hospital's main entrance doors, he carried with him a deep hope that this place might be different from all the others. He wanted to believe that here, in a building dedicated to healing and helping sick people, staff members would be judged by their character and abilities rather than their appearance. The morning sun streamed through the tall hospital windows, casting long golden rectangles across the polished floor. James stopped for a moment to straighten his blue tie and smooth down his jacket. He looked round at the busy lobby, watching doctors in white coats hurrying past, nurses pushing patients in wheelchairs, and families sitting together in the waiting area. This was a place where people came when they were at their most vulnerable, when they needed care and compassion the most. Surely, James thought to himself, people who worked in such a place would understand the importance of treating everyone with dignity and respect. James took a deep breath and walked toward the reception desk to announce his arrival for the interview. His heart was beating fast, but his steps were confident. He had faced enemy soldiers and dangerous missions overseas. He had saved lives and led men through impossible situations. Whatever challenges waited for him in this hospital, he would face them with the same courage. James did not know that his greatest test of character and strength was just beginning. Use a warm, empathetic tone. James woke up at 5:30 in the morning on his first day at St. Mary's Hospital. He had barely slept the night before. Feeling excited and nervous about starting his new job, he put on his best shirt and tie, polished his shoes until they shined, and looked at himself in the mirror. Today was the beginning of his secret mission to understand how the hospital really worked. James arrived at the hospital 30 minutes early, carrying a folder with his military records and university certificates. He wanted to make a good first impression and show everyone that he was serious about doing excellent work. The morning air was crisp and cool as he walked through the main entrance, greeting the security guard with a friendly smile. That was when he met David Roberts, the operations manager who would be his direct supervisor. David was a tall, thin man in his 40s who wore expensive suits and gold-rimmed glasses. He had perfectly styled grey hair and always kept his back very straight, as if he thought he was better than everyone around him. The moment David's eyes fell on James, something cold and unwelcoming flickered across his face. "So, you are the new hire they told me about," David said in a voice that was flat and unfriendly. He did not offer to shake James's hand or welcome him to the team. Instead, he barely glanced at the folder of credentials that James was holding out to him. "I suppose they will take anyone these days, as long as they are willing to work for a cheap." James felt a knot form in his stomach, but he kept his voice polite and professional. "Good morning, Mr. Roberts. I am very excited to be here and ready to contribute my skills to help the hospital serve its patients better." David looked James up and down with obvious disapproval, as if he was examining something unpleasant. "We will see about that," he said with a cold laugh. "First, let me show you what your real duties will be." Despite the fact that James had an impressive military background and a business degree from one of England's best universities, David immediately assigned him to the most basic and menial tasks in the hospital. He was given a mop and bucket and told to clean the floors in the storage rooms. He was handed stacks of old paperwork and told to file them in dusty cabinets that had not been organized in years. When James politely tried to mention his qualifications and suggest that he might be better suited for more administrative work, David's expression turned even more hostile. "Let us see if you can handle the basics first," David said with a nasty sneer. "People like you need to prove themselves before they can be trusted with anything important. I have seen your type before." The words "people like you" hit James like a slap across the face. He knew exactly what David meant, and it had nothing to do with his work experience or abilities. David was judging him purely based on the color of his skin, making assumptions about his character and capabilities, without even giving him a chance. As the days passed, David's treatment of James became worse and worse. During busy periods when several employees needed help or guidance, David would deliberately make James wait while he helped every other person first. He would stand there tapping his expensive watch and making James feel like he was wasting everyone's time just by existing. When James completed his assigned tasks, David would inspect his work with a magnifying glass, looking for any tiny flaw or mistake he could criticize. Even when James's work was absolutely perfect, David would find something to complain about. He would do this in front of other staff members, speaking loudly so that everyone could hear him putting James down during the weekly staff meetings. David would make pointed comments about maintaining professional standards and ensuring that all employees meet our high expectations. While he said these words, he would stare directly at James, making it clear to everyone in the room who he was really talking about. The other hospital employees watched these interactions with growing discomfort. Many of them were good, decent people who could see that what was happening was wrong. But they also knew that David had powerful connections within the hospital administration. He was friends with several board members and had been working there for over 10 years. People were genuinely afraid that if they spoke up to defend James, they might lose their own jobs. One afternoon, a kind nurse named Mary Wilson approached James during his lunch break. Mary was a woman in her 50s with gentle eyes and graying hair. She had been working at the hospital for 20 years and was respected by patients and colleagues alike. "I am so sorry about how he treats you," Mary whispered, looking round nervously to make sure David was not nearby. "What he is doing is not right, and we all know it. But David has got powerful connections in this place. The truth is, people are afraid to speak up because they need their jobs to feed their families." James felt the familiar sting of discrimination burning in his chest, the same feeling he had experienced during all those job interviews. But he also remembered his military training and the values he had sworn to defend. He had faced enemy bullets overseas while fighting for the principles of equality and justice. He would not let David's prejudice and hatred break his spirit or force him to give up. Instead of getting angry or discouraged, James decided to use this terrible experience as a learning opportunity. He watched carefully and listened closely to everything that happened around him. He took detailed mental notes about how the hospital really operated behind closed doors, documenting every instance of unfair treatment and discrimination. Each morning when James woke up, he reminded himself why he was really there. This mission was not just about him or his own career. It was about every person who deserved to be treated with dignity and respect in their workplace. Use a warm, empathetic tone. 3 weeks had passed since James started working at St. Mary's Hospital, and he thought he had seen the worst of David Roberts's cruel behavior. He believed that nothing could be more hurtful than the daily insults and unfair treatment he had already endured. But James was completely wrong about that. It was a busy Tuesday morning in early October. The hospital was bustling with activity as doctors made their rounds and nurses hurried between patient rooms. James had arrived early as usual, ready to begin another day of menial tasks that were far below his actual abilities. He was organizing files in the administrative office when he heard shouting coming from the medical supply room down the hall. WAY Dr. Patricia Green, the head of the cardiac surgery department, was standing in the supply room looking very upset and confused. She was talking rapidly to several other staff members who had gathered round her. James could hear her voice carrying down the corridor as she explained that expensive heart monitoring equipment worth over £5,000 had mysteriously disappeared overnight. "This is absolutely unacceptable," Dr. Green was saying, her voice filled with frustration. "We have 3 major surgeries scheduled for today, and we cannot perform them safely without that equipment. Someone needs to find out what happened." to it immediately. Within minutes, David Roberts appeared on the scene, strutting down the hallway with his usual air of self-importance. He pushed through the crowd of concerned employees and began asking questions about who had access to the supply room and when the equipment was last seen. For a few moments, it seemed like David might actually conduct a proper investigation to solve the mystery. But then David's cold eyes fell on James, who was standing quietly at the edge of the group, listening to the discussion like everyone else. Without any warning or explanation, David's expression changed to one of dark accusation. He pointed his finger directly at James and spoke in a voice loud enough for everyone in the entire hall. "To hear, I should have known this would happen," David announced with cruel satisfaction, as if he had just solved a difficult puzzle. "We never had theft problems in this hospital before, but ever since certain people started working here, valuable things have been going missing. I think we all know who is responsible for this." The words hit James like a physical blow to the chest. His heart began pounding so hard that he could hear it in his ears. The unfairness and cruelty of the accusation took his breath away. But even though he felt like he had been punched in the stomach, James kept his voice calm and steady when he responded. "Sir, I had absolutely nothing to do with any missing equipment," James said clearly, making sure everyone could hear him. "I have never even been inside the medical supply room without supervision. Perhaps we should check the security cameras or speak with everyone who had access to that area before making any accusations." David's pale face immediately turned bright, red with anger. His hands began shaking, and he stepped closer to James in a threatening manner. "Do not tell me how to do my job," David shouted, his voice echoing off the hospital walls. "I have been working here for over 10 years, and I know exactly what I am doing. I know your type very well. You people think you can come in here and take whatever you want, whenever you want it." The cruel words hung in the air like poison. Every person in that hallway knew exactly what David meant when he said "your type" and "you people." He was not talking about James's work experience or job performance. He was making this accusation based purely on racist assumptions about James's character. Other employees standing nearby looked down at their shoes or found excuses to walk away from the confrontation. James could see the embarrassment and discomfort written across their faces. Many of them clearly knew that David's behavior was wrong and unfair, but they also knew that David had powerful friends in the hospital administration. The fear in their eyes was obvious. They were afraid that if they spoke up to defend James or challenge David's accusations, they might lose their own jobs. They had families to feed and bills to pay, in their minds. Staying silent was the only safe choice, even though they knew an innocent man was being attacked. James felt his military training kick in as he struggled to control his emotions. He had learned long ago how to stay calm under pressure, how to think clearly even when facing terrible danger. He drew upon that strength now as he responded to David's attack. "I have served this country with honor for 6 years," James said, quietly, his dignity remaining intact despite the public humiliation he was experiencing. "I would never steal from anywhere, especially not from a hospital that serves sick and vulnerable people. My military record and my character speak for themselves." But David was not finished with his cruel assault. He threw back his head and laughed in a mocking, nasty way that made several nurses visibly cringe. "Military service, please, do not make me laugh," David said with obvious contempt. "Anyone can claim they served in the military. Anyone can make up stories about being a hero. The truth is, you do not belong in a professional environment like this hospital. Maybe you should look for work somewhere more suitable for people like you." The words were designed to cut James to his very core. to make him feel worthless and unwanted. David wanted to humiliate him so completely that he would quit his job and never come back. That evening, James sat alone in his small London apartment, feeling the heavy weight of injustice pressing down on his shoulders. The day's events played over and over in his mind like a terrible movie he could not turn off. But as he sat there in the growing darkness, his eyes fell upon his military medals displayed on the wall. Those medals reminded him of all the good people he had sworn to protect during his years of service. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, and probably more unfair treatment. But James knew he could not give up now. Too much depended on his secret mission to understand and eventually change what was happening at St. Mary's Hospital. Use a warm. Empathetic tonight was a cold Thursday morning in late October when the monthly board of directors meeting was scheduled to take place at St. Mary's Hospital. The meeting room on the 5th floor had large windows that looked out over the busy London streets. Below, round the long mahogany table sat some of the most important and powerful people connected to the hospital. Elizabeth Harper, the hospital's chief executive officer, had called this emergency session after receiving several troubling reports about problems with workplace culture and unusually high staff turnover rates. Elizabeth was a woman in her early 50s with kind eyes and silver hair. She had been running the hospital for 8 years and genuinely cared about creating a positive environment for both patients and employees. The board members filed into the room one by one. Carrying their folders and coffee cups, there was Dr. Michael Chen, the head of surgery. There was Margaret Williams, the financial director. There was Robert Taylor, who represented the hospital's main investors. They all took their usual seats round the table, chatting quietly about hospital business while they waited for the meeting to begin. David Roberts walked into the boardroom that morning feeling extreme. Eli confident and pleased with himself. He was carrying his monthly operations report in a leather briefcase and wore his most expensive suit. David had no idea that this would be the most important and devastating day of his entire career. For the past month, David had been enjoying his power over James Thompson. He loved making a new employee feel small and unwanted. He took pleasure in assigning James the worst jobs and criticizing his work in front of other staff members. David truly believed that he was in complete control of the situation and that James was just another person he could push round without any consequences. As David took his seat at the conference table, he was already planning what he would say in his report. He was thinking about how he could subtly suggest that the hospital should be more careful about who they hired in the future. He wanted to plant seeds of doubt about employees like James without saying anything too obvious. The boardroom clock showed exactly 9 o'clock when Elizabeth Harper called the meeting to order. She looked round the table at the familiar faces and began speaking in her usual professional manner. "Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for coming to this emergency session. We have some serious issues to discuss about our workplace culture." Just as Elizabeth was about to continue speaking, the heavy wooden door of the boardroom opened with a quiet creak. Every person in the room turned to see who was entering the meeting so late. What they saw made them all fall completely silent with shock and confusion. James Thompson walked slowly into the room, still wearing his simple blue work uniform instead of a business suit like everyone else. His work boots made soft sounds on the polished wooden floor as he moved toward the table. The board members stared at him with wide eyes, wondering why a regular hospital employee was interrupting their private meeting. David Roberts felt his confident smile disappear from his face as he recognized the man he had been tormenting for weeks. His skin turned as white as paper, and his mouth fell open in complete disbelief. David's hands began trembling as he tried to understand what was happening. Why was James in the boardroom? How had security allowed him to enter such an important meeting? "Good morning, everyone." James said in a calm, steady voice that filled the quiet room. He moved toward the empty chair at the very head of the long table, the seat that was always reserved for the chairman of the board. I apologize for my unusual appearance this morning, but I have spent the last month working undercover as a regular employee to understand the true culture of our hospital. Elizabeth Harper looked round the table at the confused faces of the board members, and then she smiled sadly. She had been keeping James's secret for weeks. Knowing how difficult and painful his undercover mission must have been, now it was time to reveal the truth. Board members, Elizabeth said clearly, making sure everyone could hear her words, I would like you to meet James Thompson, our new chairman of the board of directors, and a decorated military veteran who served our country with great honor. The revelation hit the room like a thunderbolt. Several board members gasped out loud. Dr. Chen dropped his coffee cup, and it shattered on the floor. Margaret Williams put her hand over her mouth in shock. But no one was more stunned than David Roberts, whose entire world was crashing down around him in that single moment. David's hands began shaking so violently that he had to grip the edge of the table to steady himself. His breathing became quick and shallow as he realized the terrible truth. The man he had insulted, humiliated, and falsely accused of theft was actually his ultimate superior. James was not just another employee that David could push round. He was the most powerful person in the entire hospital. James reached into his pocket and pulled out a small notebook that was filled with handwritten pages. He opened it carefully and looked round the table at each board member with serious, steady eyes. When he began to speak, his voice was professional and controlled, but everyone could hear the deep emotion underneath his words. I did not serve 3 tours of duty overseas defending the principles of freedom and equality just to come home and watch those same principles destroyed in our own workplace, James said. Every patient who walks through our hospital doors deserves to be cared for by staff members who are treated with dignity and respect, regardless of their background or the color of their skin. For the next 30 minutes, James read from his detailed notebook, describing incident after incident of discrimination, harassment, and hostile behavior. He told them about being assigned menial tasks despite his qualifications. He described the false accusations of theft. He explained how the atmosphere of fear prevented good employees from speaking up against injustice. The other board members listened in shocked silence. Some of them wiped tears from their eyes as they realized how badly they had failed the people who worked for them. They had created a system that allowed bullies like David to flourish while good people suffered in silence. David Roberts tried several times to speak, to defend himself or explain his actions. But no words would come out of his mouth. He sat, frozen in his chair like a statue, staring at the man whose life he had tried to make miserable, the man who was now revealed as someone with the power and courage to fight for what was right. Use a warm, empathetic tone. The changes at St. Mary's Hospital began before the sun had set on that dramatic Thursday afternoon. Within 2 hours of James revealing his true identity to the shocked board members, David Roberts was called into Elizabeth Harper's office and told that his employment was being terminated immediately. He was escorted from the building by security guards, carrying only a small box of personal belongings from his desk. James wasted no time in putting his comprehensive plan into action. He had spent weeks thinking about exactly what needed to change at the hospital, and now he finally had the power to make those changes happen. The very next morning, he called an emergency meeting for all hospital staff members, from the highest-ranking doctors to the newest cleaning assistants. The hospital's main auditorium was packed with over 300 employees who had heard rumors about what had happened at the board meeting. They whispered nervously to each other as they waited to hear what their new chairman would say. Many of them had witnessed David's cruel treatment of James, and they were curious to see how this incredible story would unfold. James walked onto the stage wearing a simple black suit instead of his work uniform. He looked out at the sea of faces before him, seeing a mixture of curiosity, anxiety, and hope in their eyes. When he began to speak, his voice was strong and clear, filling every corner of the large room. Real change starts with admitting our mistakes, James told the assembled crowd. For too long, this hospital has allowed discrimination and unfair treatment to exist within our walls. I have seen firsthand what happens when good people stay silent in the face of injustice. That silence ends today, and it will never return to this workplace. Over the following weeks, James worked tirelessly to implement new policies that would transform the hospital's culture from the ground up. He established mandatory respect and inclusion training sessions for all managers and supervisors. Every person in a leadership position would learn how to treat employees fairly and recognize their own unconscious biases. James also created an anonymous reporting system that allowed any employee to report discrimination, harassment, or unfair treatment without fear of losing their job. A special committee would investigate every single complaint thoroughly and take appropriate action. No one would ever again have to suffer in silence the way James had during his undercover weeks. Perhaps most importantly, James developed mentorship programs that would help employees from all backgrounds advance in their careers based purely on their merit, skills, and character. He wanted to make sure that talented people would never again be held back because of prejudice or favoritism. One of James's first and most meaningful decisions was to promote Mary Wilson, the kind nurse who had shown him compassion during his darkest days at the hospital. Mary had been the only person brave enough to whisper words of support when David was treating James so cruelly. "You showed me kindness when it was not easy or safe to do." So, James told Mary as he offered her the position of head of the new employee relations department. "Now, I want you to help us build a place where everyone can show that same kindness to each other every single day." Mary accepted the position with tears of joy in her eyes. She had worked at the hospital for 20 years, always dreaming of having more influence to help her fellow employees. Now she would have the power and resources to make a real difference in people's working lives. The transformation at St. Mary's Hospital was not just about creating new rules and policies. James understood that real change had to come from the heart. He began sharing his personal story with employees at every level of the organization. He talked openly about his military service, his struggles to find employment after returning home, and his deep belief in the values of equality and justice that he had fought to defend overseas. James explained his vision of creating a workplace where the healing mission of the hospital extended far beyond just medical care. He wanted St. Mary's to be a place where every person who worked there felt valued, respected, and supported in their professional growth. The results of these changes became visible remarkably quickly. Within just 3 months, staff turnover rates dropped to the lowest levels in the hospital's history. Employee surveys showed dramatic improvements in job satisfaction and workplace morale. Most importantly, patient satisfaction scores began climbing as well, because happy employees provided better care to the people they served. Within 6 months, St. Mary's Hospital had become famous throughout London as a model employer that other organizations wanted to study and copy. Talented doctors, nurses, and administrators from diverse backgrounds began applying for jobs there because they had heard about the respectful and supportive environment that James had created. James made it a point to walk through the hospital corridors regularly, still wearing ordinary clothes instead of expensive suits. He would stop to chat with janitors, nurses, technicians, and doctors, asking about their experiences and listening carefully to their suggestions for further improvements. He had learned that true leadership meant understanding challenges from the ground up and having the courage to make difficult changes when they were needed. Word of the hospital's remarkable transformation spread to other institutions across England and beyond. James began receiving invitations to speak at conferences and meetings, where he would share his story and inspire other leaders to examine their own organizations honestly. Many companies and hospitals implemented similar programs after hearing about the success at St. Mary's. One evening, James stood in his office on the top floor of the hospital, looking out through the large windows at the lights of London stretching into the distance. He thought about his incredible journey from rejected job applicant to respected leader, and he felt a deep sense of satisfaction and purpose. James had learned that sometimes the most important battles for justice and equality are not fought on distant battlefields with weapons and uniforms. Sometimes they happen in ordinary workplaces where people simply deserve to be treated with basic human dignity and respect. His story had become a beacon of hope for countless people who faced discrimination and unfair treatment in their own lives. It proved that one person's courage to do what is right can transform entire communities and create positive change that lasts for generations to come.